National Museum of African American History and Culture, Smithsonian, Willie Smith Oral History Project, Bethann Hardison, model, owner Bethann Management Company Incorporated, an activist. Interviewed by Kelly Navies, Museum Specialist, Oral History, July 2nd, 2019, New York, New York. A dark-skinned woman with silver gray and very short cropped curly hair sits on a patinaed wooden bench in a room lined with posters and bookcases. She wears a sleeveless black blouse and silver earrings that dangle when she moves her head.
Today is September 4th, 2019. My name is Kelly Elaine Navies, Museum Specialist, Oral History from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm here to interview Ms. Bethann Hardison for the Willie Smith Street Couture exhibition that will be opening at the Cooper Hewitt in spring of 2020. Also present is Trudy Hutcherson, our videographer. How are you today, Ms. Hardison?
Very well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be doing this.
Yes, well, I've been looking forward to this interview myself. Can you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in the month of September, and that's where it ends.
Okay. So what was it like to grow up in Brooklyn? Tell me about that.
Oh, I love growing up in Brooklyn. I love growing up in Brooklyn because I was raised by my grandmother and my mother the first 12 years of my life, and then I went to live with my dad. We were in Bedford-Stuyvesant when my grandmother and my mother, where I lived with them, and my father and my mother also lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant on Green Avenue. When they separated and divorced, then my mother stayed in the same area. We stayed very close. So one block to another, we moved into rooming houses. And then I just had a great life in Brooklyn. I did a lot of great things. I became a child tap dancer. I ran track for the PAL.
What's the PAL?
Public Athletic League.
How old were you when you ran track?
11.
11.
Yeah.
And where did you learn to tap dance?
Oh, my hoofer was Duke Baldwin, so I learned he had a studio on what's that street, Fulton Street. And it was great because he was quite well known. He used to get a lot of bookings. First I started out by myself, then he suggested that maybe we get 2 other girls, and I took 2 girlfriends of mine and we taught them how to tap. And I became very successful. So wherever he would book things at night, of course, and then my mother would wake me up and then we'd go and do this dance, tap dance, and then the people would throw us money because it was child labor laws, you couldn't get paid at that time. And then that was great. I went and I tapped on radio. I tapped on television. It was great.
That was before you were 11, or after?
No, that was after I was 11.
That was after you were.
Yeah,
So you were like a teen during that.
Yeah, I was doing no. It was
like,
already 11, 12.
Oh.
I ran track in that same frame time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's great. So you were already in the world of performance and entertainment.
Well, I never thought of it as entertainment.
Tap dancing?
No, I never thought of it as entertainment. Yeah. No, I know it is, but I never thought of it like I was in the world, because you put, like now in my life, I always say you're just putting one foot in front of each other and you're just doing things. So sure. It was something I was capable of doing. My mother was always looking like, what are you doing now? And it wasn't something like she provided. It wasn't like something like now, poor parents, God bless them, they're all so busy rearing their kids with play dates and activities, and that's not how I was raised. Everything we did was street. So we went off and I found something I wanted to do. My mother just said, okay, what is it? And I was telling her about it. She said, okay, and I'd just go off and do it.
Tell me a little bit more about your mother and your grandmother.
My mother was a really funny party girl, and my grandmother was called by my father to come up from North Carolina to live with me and her. He felt that, my mother was such a party girl, he didn't feel that she'd be responsible enough for me. So he begged my grandmother to come from North Carolina.
His mother?
No, my mother's mother.
So it was your mother's mother?
Yeah, because his mother was already here.
Okay.
But he needed, I don't know, for whatever reason he chose and asked her. And she left her home in North Carolina, Vanceboro, and came up north. It was great growing up with both of them. They both were domestics. And I was a latchkey kid from the age of 7. So I pretty much took care of myself until they came home. And those days, everyone looked out for everyone's kid. I did a lot of things. I mean, I was so happy to keep meeting young girls that I knew that was friends. I would always going to someone's church. I was always, my parents, even though they were Christians, they weren't religious. So I then became part of a gang. I lived a good old life of being in a gang, not like a gang of kids standing around in a corner, but a gang where we were the, they're called the Lady Chaplains. The name of the gang was the Chaplains. They were a 5-borough gang. There were many gangs in Brooklyn, and then also in all the boroughs. But they weren't violent like the gangs are today.
Right.
The best of the violence was really just getting beat up if you're in the wrong neighborhood.
Was this when you were a teenager?
This is from, to be honest with you, it's from 9 to 12.
Wow. So the Lady Chaplains, they were part of the chaplains overall?
That's right.
Oh, okay. So tell me, so your grandmother, you said she was from Vansboro?
Vansboro, North Carolina, which is a small town next to...
Because I'm from North Carolina. I mean, I have roots there too, but I'm not familiar with that town. Can you spell it?
Yes, Vanceboro.
Oh, I don't know that one. So which
Yes,
part of
right
North
next. It's
Carolina?
right next to New Bern.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And then I spent every summer of my life from 18 months old to 18 years old in North Carolina.
In Vansboro.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And what was that like to come from Brooklyn to go to?
Yeah, and it's very, I say that oftentimes. I'm so happy I had that experience because we lived very rural.
Yeah.
Outhouses, chickens, I had to, the things that you had to do. We were tobacco family, so I learned to pull tobacco, grade tobacco, string tobacco, and this is all growing up. When you think about segregation at that time, I always say North Carolina was the safest of those states, of all of them, in that time frame. And in our road, which has now been named after my great uncle, we're a small town. But at that same time, it was so interesting because whatever family had to finish up their crops, the other family helped, and that could be black or white. So even though we had to, if we went to the movies, we had to sit upstairs and it was segregation time, or you knew not to go inside a certain store a certain way, or you knew not to drink a water fountain if you were out in a further place in North Carolina. I never felt when people hear this, they say, "Oh, how awful for you." And I think I just laughed. I just said, it wasn't so awful. It really wasn't. Knowing that people were strung up and hung and killed, that was awful. That didn't barely ever happen in North Carolina, the state of North Carolina. It happened in Mississippi, Alabama. Those are the states that were much more rigorous.
So the transition from the North, where you didn't have that restriction, to North Carolina didn't bother you that much?
Not at all. I think I still live that same life as when in Rome, do as the Romans. Yeah, I don't try and go scantily dressed in Middle Eastern countries or Moroccan or Muslim countries, So you just know that that's what it is, and I love living with my my aunt, my great aunt, my grandmother's sister. I loved living in that little house, and her making me understand how to go get a chicken and kill it and get it prepared for dinner, pumping the pump of water, and I liked all that, and learning how to really grade tobacco. It was all good because it was small. Everybody was wholesome. Most of the family lived on that road, different houses.
What was the road? You said it was named after your uncle.
Now it's called. I didn't know what the name of it was then. It was just how to get to the house, but now it's named after Jasper Campbell, the Campbell Road.
So tell me a little bit about your father.
Oh, my father was a total intellectual, the opposite of my mother. My mother was a great chick, party, but my father was an intellect. And he eventually became a very well-known imam, which is in the Islamic religion, is someone who's a leading person. But he taught me, once I went to live with him at 12, he really educated me about a lot of things. He was a great influence on practically everyone who was turning towards Islam at that time. A lot of musicians, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad contacted my father when he wanted to come from Chicago into New York, asked my father to come to Chicago so he could talk to him, so he could see if it was, if they would be receptive to them because their teachings were different.
Right.
As religious as they thought they were Muslims, Islam doesn't allow you to speak negatively about anyone.
Right. So he wasn't in the nation, he was in an actual tradition.
Yeah, there's one is, I should say organic. Yeah, he wasn't part of the nation, but surely he understood it, but he understood also the power of culturally helping people change. I'm sorry. Do I have to take that down?
Yeah, I'll get it.
No, that's not the.
We took a short break. It's still September 4th, 2019, and you were telling me about your childhood. We talked about North Carolina and your father. You were talking
Yes,
about
I was talking about my father.
Yes.
He was Orthodox Muslim. They were not. They're Elijah Muhammad Muslims. We look at it that way. Then it became known later as the nation. But he had a great deal of. Malcolm sought my father for counseling, especially after a while when he started to become disenchanted with the nation, with the Elijah Muhammad Muslims. And he wanted to go to Mecca. My father would tell him he'll never get in. They'll never allow him to come, and he didn't believe it, so he attempted, and he wasn't granted permission to go. And my father would say it's because you can't preach hate, because it's not religious. But eventually, his life changed, and he was able to do so.
So at that age, when you were a child, how did you envision your future? Like, what did you want to be?
For myself, what I thought I would like to be as a child, I never had any particular ambition about what I would want to do, except for at one point, because I was such a keen, I knew I wanted to be in maybe the world of entertainment in some way, because I loved to dance. And I think Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, some of the girls, Ginger Rogers, and all those girls were like keen for me because I was a dancer as well. Not a trained dancer other than with Duke Baldwin. But I think that's the only thing I ever thought about as a young child. I didn't have any real, I want to be.
So you weren't thinking about the fashion world at that time?
There was no such thing.
There was no such thing?
Not in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
No.
What kind of, when you look back on it though, what kind of fashion and design were you exposed to at an early age?
No, we were just exposed. I was never exposed to fashion and design. I was exposed to people with style.
Right. So
that's
actually what I'm getting at.
Yes,
so
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, style was something that basically is something you look at, and you look at someone on your block, or you look at the old man who stands, and you look at the way his pants are cut. You look at the way a man walks. Somebody was bow-legged and had a great double-pleated pair of pants. You notice things like that. I notice things like that because they stay in your memory. Mm-hmm. I think the actuality of seeing women dressed in just basic nice things, but you never look at it and say, oh my God, look at that dress. I mean, it didn't happen like that. And you're busy you're living the culture. You're not living the exterior of things. It's such a simple lifestyle when you live in a rooming house, when you don't have, you may have to at some point share a bathroom with people. But then eventually my mother kept going one step up, until eventually, my grandmother she moved in with us, and she had her own room, and then me and my mother shared the bigger room, and then we had to go upstairs for the kitchen. But that's to share. So the life is so simple.
Okay, we're talking about your aspirations as a little girl. Sorry for the interruptions. And you were talking about just recognizing style, not fashion specifically.
Yeah, no, there was no such thing. I don't think, one thing I do want to say that's very important too, is that when you ask the question about aspiration of such, I honestly tell you that there was a magazine, 17 magazine. I was about 9 years old, and I went to a store and I saw this woman, she wasn't a woman, she was a girl, Carol Lindley, blonde girl, big blue eyes, big full cheeks, on the cover of a magazine. Please don't bang so long. And I looked at that magazine. I said to my mom, I got to have that magazine. She looked at it. It says 17. You're not 17. It doesn't matter. And she was very cooperative with me always.
What struck you about the magazine?
It was the girl.
Carol Lindley.
Yeah, it was just a girl that I don't know what it was, because that's all you're selling. I think the thing with it was just more than a magazine. I don't know if I could say the girl, because that's all it is that we have at the time. All magazines is just the image on the cover. But that girl was the first person I really recognized that I became like a bit of a fan. And so I just love all the things that she became as I, discovered her. Little did I know, she became so successful at what she was doing at the time and then later on. And I laugh about this as life has gone on. I said, maybe that's what it was, because I really had an eye even then, That was something I think about. But I never think about, well, it was something that was drawing me to fashion or was drawing me to that particular world. It obviously, I was that.
Yes, it was in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you meet Willie Smith? Talk about that. It was 1967. So talk about when you first met him and what that was like and the circumstances of that meeting.
Yeah, Willie discovered me in the street about neighborhood of the garment business. It must have been somewhere, I don't know dates anymore. I guess what that could have been, 68, 67. He was probably no longer with, he may have still been with Digits. Yes, he was with Digits still, out of school with Digits. And he was asking people who I was. Not that I knew this, but this girl.
Just saw you walking down the street.
Oh yeah, because we walked, it was in the garment business. We all had to go out every day and do things, errands, and maybe go out to lunch and things you did for your company. And I worked in the garment business at the time. I worked for Ruth Manchester. At the time, he discovered me, Junior Dress House. And he sent a girl, he was asking people, did you know who this girl is, or this one? He thought I was a designer. And when he described me, there was a girl who, at those years, they had buying offices, and they would have like monitors who would go out to our the buying office would send somebody out to collect the orders for what they were seeing, and they would send it to the showrooms, and they would just, it was like a runner. And he knew this girl. She came to his office often, and he asked her. He said, "Oh, I think I know who that is." And he said, "Can you get a message to her?" So he contacted me, and I met him in the 1407 Club, which is right underneath 1407 building. It was a restaurant bar, and I met him, and he brought a friend of his, Harriet Selwyn, with him. And he was just like basically interviewing me. Well, tell me about you. I just love the way you dress. I love the way you look. And he was saying this to me, and it's funny. He thought I was a designer. And I said, no, I'm a showroom girl. Oh, wow. He said, well, I would love then, if that's the case, would you ever be interested to work with me? In what capacity? Well, sometimes I have a reason to have appearances. Sometimes, just things with this, with my collections. If I could have someone I could put things on and get your feeling for it, because we seem to have similar style. So I went back. My Jewish family, who I work for, they were so supportive of everything I ever told them, that somebody said to me, "Oh, that's so wonderful." He said, "He's come to be so successful." He was working for Digits at the time. And he said, "Oh, you should do it." So then I start to do a little few things with him. I wind up leaving that job, and then Willie, to support me in some capacity, he had me come on as assistant. And then I worked with him as an assistant. But that was mostly at home. At his home, doing things, filing. He had a lot of fan mail, doing all those kind of things. And, him wanting to say, "Oh, get rid of that. Don't answer that." And I go, "No," because I, so brand new to it. "No, you have to answer." He said, "Well, then you'll be answering everything. You can't do that." It was interesting.
So you worked for him as an assistant, and you also modeled for him?
Yeah.
How did you split your time between those two things?
It wasn't so much that I had to split time, because it's all the same. All the same in the same time. It's like, not that he had so much you had to do. It wasn't like the assistants of today. It was just giving somebody something to do. So you're a muse, and the muse does everything. That's like if you're in Paris and you're working in an atelier, So and same thing with me when I worked for Stephen Burroughs. You may have been a showroom girl, but you also do filing on the side, and you do other things to keep your day busy, because you know you're not always modeling. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just want to back up just really quickly. So you said that the people you were working for knew who he was, but did you also know who he was when you met him?
Yes.
You already know?
Yeah.
You had heard of him?
Yeah, because he was being written up in Women's Wear Daily. And when he got the first job with Digit, and then people started recognizing him, he became, you know, he was very young, but he was, you know, he was recognized so early.
Yeah. What was your first impression of him personally?
No, first of all, he's a good-looking boy. And then he was so excited. His manner of encouraging you directly, and then you got to know him more, you see that that's how he was about many things. He was very much about support and recognition. He had an eye for art. He had an eye for music or dance. He was very much about, you know, support of the artist, support of anyone who had something, you know. And if he thought you had something, he would want to share it with somebody else he thought that could help you or be with you or something like that. So he was magnificent. I always said because of his grandmother, my grandmother, and Stephen Burroughs, and I always aligned those two because they were my bookends, that I wondered if we were so kind or good because of our grandparents, because each one of us had very wonderful, influential grandparents, and our grandparents were our grandmothers. And Willie had his, Nana, and so Stephen had his, and I had mine. And so I often think that he was very well raised, and I say very well raised, meaning that's what it looked like, because he was the end product. You don't know how someone was raised, really. You know that, and Nana, you met his mother, you knew they're nice people, good people. But his vision, his understanding, his politeness, his quality of life, and how he understood good grooming, how to go to lunch with someone and be so thoughtful to send flowers the next day, write a note. He was meticulous about things like that. You don't meet many people who do things like that. You don't meet many young black people who think to do things like that. That's a training. And I don't think that was something that he was trained to do. I think it was innate.
So what did you think of his designs at that time?
Well, you know, they were just, you know, he thought I was a designer. To me, they were just nice clothes. But what was more impressive to me was that you saw it always on the street. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that before, other than right now in this last decade of Tory Burch's little shoe. I'd never seen anything where you just recognize all the time Willie wear on the street. And that was later he became, you know, with Willie Ware. That's when I became even closer to him. You know?
Tell me about that. Describe that.
Yeah, because he then was asked to do his own company. So that's where I really was able to put a real foot into my foot into the shoe, so to speak, of helping him. Willie was someone who, I mean, the fact that someone actually believed that he could be a business independent of him working for a business, that he could have, that they could start a business and it would happen. And the partner of Willie brought in a third partner who was in India. So all the manufacturing was done in India.
Laurie Mallet.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was your role in Willie Ware?
Oh, it wasn't that big. It wasn't big other than me being Bethann. It wasn't like I was an employee of Willie Ware. I never was. I was only working with in inspiration to Willie, you know, what he needed for me to be around him. Or even if I wasn't anywhere in the office, he knew he could reach out to me and talk to me. Eventually, I went on and started doing other things in my life, and I was still someone he relied on, depended on, energy-wise, personality-wise, style-wise, communication-wise. He's someone that just really needed, you know, always will want to have your energy around him because it did something good for him.
Did you
vice
walk
versa.
in any of the Willie Ware shows?
Yes.
Tell me about that experience.
Just walk, you know, by that time,
Yeah.
I've done some walking in shows. And then at
So
some...
how were his shows different than others, if they were?
His shows, only difference was that he always liked to have a show at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is the most unusual thing for a person of color. I think you should have it 9 o'clock at night. I mean, you know, but nope, let's get him in, let's get him out, let's get him when they really break up in the morning. I said, Willie, I mean, he'd have early morning shows. And they were creative, yes, because of who he chose, the person he chose. And most models, you know, whoever he wanted, No one said no because people really appreciated who he was and what he did. And so they were produced, but simply. They weren't overproduced. It's the other things that he did, his office, the little film that he did. There were other things that he did that lend to his name and all.
Mm-hmm. What about Digits? I know we talked about Willie Ware, but you walked for Digits. What were those?
No, I didn't walk for Digits.
You didn't walk for Digits?
No.
Oh, okay. So what do you remember the shows for
No, he didn't.
Digits
Digits didn't do shows.
Okay.
Only Willie did
All
that.
right, so
That was more of a designer. Willie was a designer to work for more like a manufacturer.
yes.
That was like his first job.
Okay.
And Digits was that. Digits was more like a manufacturer. They hired this young guy to do the clothes. But once he went out on his own, that's when you can become full-on creative.
Was there a specific silhouette designed by Smith that you wore on and off the runaway?
Oh, I'm sure, but I promise you, I don't remember. I'm sure. I have, because his pants, he made, my interest, truly, he and Kenzo were two of the people who made a great pant. There's not many people who can cut a good pant. That's something, because we come from the garment business, we really know, and I knew everything about that because I used to fit clothes. They used to fit clothes for me. Willie, that's the other thing I forgot to say to you. I was a fit model for Willie, but I fit for other people. So I understand exactly how things should fit because you listen to the production guy when he comes in, when they start doing all the samples, when they start, you listen to everything. That's the greatest education too. And he really would cut a good pant, a pant that would fit practically anybody. And so that was something I always wore. I was big on sportswear. He was a sportswear kid. So yeah, I wore a lot of his stuff that way.
Did you have a favorite piece?
The great thing about not knowing anything is you don't remember things. You don't remember. Did I have a favorite? Of course you have. If you have a thing that you just kept. What I liked about Willie is what Willie he always believed if the bottom is going to be narrow, then the top has to be with volume. If the top is narrow, then the bottom, whether it be skirt or pant, had to be a volume. That was something that was his theory. So he'd make a full shape pant. I have to give, in fact, I have something that when I did the Black Girls Coalition our first affair, Willie sketched something for me that I promised I was going to give to the museum. Just let them see if they can. Yeah, it's in my house upstate New York. I forgot about Alexandra, but I told her I wanted to see it. I don't know if it's appropriate, but at least you should see it.
Yes,
Yeah, and they might be interested in seeing it. And when you see everything is like the sleeves, everything is like has a bubble. It's an effect. That's the thing you knew from Willie. But once again, the most important thing for me was how you'd be walking down the street and you would notice, because you knew the clothes, everyone knew, you'd see a Willie wear. And that was something I'd never forget.
Did you ever assist with any other designs?
Maybe in the instruction of what I thought, or an idea, definitely what I said. Maybe something he said, I love that. Wait a minute, and he'd go right and he'd start sketching. You mean like this? Those kind of things, yes.
Yes, that was significant. So what about the models? I know you formed your own modeling firm, and you sent models to him, is that correct?
Yes.
We'll talk a little bit about that and some of the models that you sent to him.
Well, interesting enough, one particular case is David Kennedy. God bless you, David. Because others are just models. They're people. You don't remember which one. There's a lot of them. They come, they go. And even when I didn't have my model agency, I was always there to help him to select who he was going to have and help him to get and book the girls or boys. But surely he booked Bonnie Berman from me, and Bonnie was like a top model in the world. So, and she's a beautiful, my black blonde girl, I used to call her. She's blonde as hell and blue-eyed. He was so happy to be at Bonnie, but he never had any problem with anyone saying yes to him. And wherever I could, I was influential to make sure he had whatever model he wanted. But people always gave him models. And nowadays there's more discrepancy because we have so many cooks in the kitchen. We have casting directors and stylists. We didn't have all that before. Before it was just the designer and his team. Whatever they want, they went after. They could get. It's not all this politicalness, you know? But the one person I wanted to mention was David Kennedy, because David was the first dreadlock. That was really a beautiful dread. I mean, handsome man face, but beautiful. And you didn't see dreads then. And I had dreads, but everyone said, oh my God, they thought it was so unique. But in our industry, you could have anything. Just didn't have many people of color being exposed to others, the whites, in that way. But I remember David, and then one time they needed to get a, he had to get two other brothers because they wanted him to have, Willie wanted him to have like 3 maybe guys instead of 2, maybe more than 1. So he got some of his boys, and they were all dreads. But before the show started, they asked if they could go out and adjust their attitude, and I didn't know what that meant. So they had to go out and they had to smoke a little weed at 9 o'clock in the morning so they can get on the stage, because none of them had. David had walked once or twice, but his buddies had never walked in a fashion show. To loosen them up, yeah. I got to get my fan. I thought I put it.
We'll take a brief pause.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the fashion show with the dreads.
Yeah, yeah.
David Kennedy.
David Kennedy, yes. That was just a funny thing, you know. I didn't know what he meant by it, and he said, could you excuse us? And they went out into an area outside somewhere, and then we had to call them for call time because they needed people to start lining up before they walk out. You have to line everyone up. And that's when I realized what was happening. It was very, very funny. It's the reality of good things. But that's a memory I always have. And some of the models who were, you know, who actually showed for Willie was really wonderful too, because they really step up for him. And it was just very simple. I mean, it's just straight walking. It's, you know, good turns. It's not as lifeless as some people think modeling is today, but it definitely. He always had a vision about the lighting, you know.
I understand you used to dance in your shows a little bit.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I could. Yeah, because, you know, sometimes if the music hit, you had no restriction, you know, everybody would just walk. But if the music hit me, one thing, Calvin Klein always had the greatest music.
We're rolling. Okay, we had another pause, and we are returning. It is still September 4th, 2019. Still sitting here with Bethann Hardison. This is Kelly Navies and Trudy Hutcherson, and we were talking about your years with Willie Smith. We ended with a fashion show with David Kennedy, but I think we wrapped up that story.
We did. Yeah.
Let's talk about Willie Smith as an artist. You described him as an artist. What did you mean by that, and do you see other fashion designers in the same way, or was he different?
Where Willie was different too. You're squeaking. Where Willie was different to other artists. Willie was an artist, and I do say that because Willie, even though he designed, it was his aesthetic about it, his need for his surrounding, which most people of a certain persuasion always knows how certain things should be for their own. But it's how he reached outside of his own industry and supported the arts. And how he understood that made me understand how much of an artist he was. And how he understood others, and how he supported a fashion editor or a person who was a makeup artist, how he supported them and made them believe more in themselves and gave them more opportunity. I think it takes an artisan's mind to recognize that willingness and to do. It's almost like it's self-reflect.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're talking about his work with video and also with dancers like Bill T. Jones. And what did you think about that evolution in his
And
career?
also, there's what's a girl's name? Debbie McIntyre. Yeah, another one. I mean, he just related to all that. Christos. I mean, he followed him all over the world. They were such good friends. You know, I mean, what was your question? Sorry.
Oh, we were talking about his work as an artist and
Yeah,
his
but
vision,
what was your
his vision as an artist.
Yeah.
Yes.
You asked me a question and I can't remember.
Well, were you referring to his work with video and with dancers? And
yeah.
So you were elaborating on that.
No, that's true, but you asked me specific. I just lost it. But yeah, he basically had that, and I think. You asked me what did I think of that? What did I think of that relationship
with those other people in the arts?
People in the arts. it was all helpful to someone like myself because I was part of his entourage, so and his good friend and his girl. So I was always exposed to it. And then at the time, I had already superseded and gone past Willie separately, and I was already very close to Issey Miyake, and I was modeling in Europe and producing shows for Kenza Yamamoto and doing things. And so, you know, even for Willie, it was always very interesting that I too could turn him on to things. So it was nice that he could meet Issey, if someone like Coris Armand, or someone had a big, wonderful art dinner, or interesting people, artisans, or Fernando Sanchez, any of those people, and they've always brought the most interesting people together. I mean, there was always that. That was a very special time, the 70s and the 80s.
In what way?
It was more intimate in what was done. There was less outsiders to influence what could be. You didn't need to feel that you had to be approved or supported by the media or outsiders. It's almost like it was like a milking of the cow that sort of happened with everybody, because we were all sort of part of this posse of things that happened. And the wonderful thing about coming up in that time frame, anybody could sort of make it. And a lot of people did, that you'll never hear their names anymore. But at that one moment, someone was happening too. You know, the ones who stood out stronger were people who maybe hit the wall harder, or maybe really brought something to the table, or to the party, better to say. Someone like Giorgio Sanangelo, or Halston. People who, you know, just came along at a time that when it was really interesting. And Willie was one of those people too. Stephen Burrows, really interesting. They all were independent, all different. Everybody supporting each other because no one was copying of each other. They each had their own independent style. So, and then, you know, it was easy breezy. We had, of course, none of the internet and all that stuff. Everybody knows that, everybody says that. But it made a great difference. And then sometimes New York is not a hot place where Europeans don't want to come because they say, New York, I'm over New York. This comes and goes, New York. Then it's up, then it's down, then it's up, then it's down. Then Studio 54 happened. Then it was off. Everybody came. Oh God, it's happening again.
Did you used to go to Studio 54 with Willie Smith?
Birds Fly, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I didn't go with Willie.
You didn't go with Willie?
No. It was more Stephen Burrow moment. I was more going with Stephen, but Willie would go. Yeah, I started to rise up in a different way. Willie still was who he was, but I started to move in a different way.
Did he support you in your endeavors?
Oh God, he was the one who tried to get Stephen Burrows to book me. When Stephen was able to leave, you know, Au Boutique and get brought into Bendel's, Henri Bendel, with Jerry Stutz, brought him into this and made him a resident designer at the store. Willie, first thing, he was calling him and saying, you gotta see this girl, you gotta, you know. But at that time, Stephen didn't recognize me in that way. Bobby Breslau, who was part of his posse, Stevens did, but Stephen didn't see it. But he would call, how did I know Bruce Weber? How did Bruce Weber know me? Willie Smith. Willie said, you gotta see this girl, you gotta photograph this girl. And Bruce was just picking up a camera then. He was just starting to photograph. So Bruce and I became this little two kids going out to Central Park every Saturday, and him just photographing me. No, Willie was someone, like I said earlier, if anyone he saw had some potential, he was making connections. He connected dots all the time. But not just meeting this one or that one. It was everyone had something. When he connected you, there was something.
No, that's fascinating. So tell me about the type of things that you and Willie did socially together.
Dance. We definitely danced.
Where would you go?
His house. We would just dance alone. We would dance. We go to clubs, yes, of course. We would always, he loves good food. That's another thing. He's always discovering the best new restaurant or some place that he thought was cool. And yeah, that he introduced me, and this is a really interesting.
Well, what kind of clubs? What clubs did you go to? What kind of food did you eat?
Well,
Give me some details.
Well,
there.
the clubs, there we go again. Well, he didn't go to he wasn't a big, he wasn't like I was a real dance person. And the clubs that happened at that time were like, I can't name them all, but Leviticus or The Loft, Paradise Garage. They were clubs that were non-alcoholic and just hardcore dance clubs. So those are places. I was more that. I don't know where Willie. Willie wasn't so much, because he was just he had this one step. He just interesting. It was interesting that he would go, but he didn't go like I would go, and I could flow into a different crowd of people. Willie was also shy. As much as it didn't appear that way, he was, because once he stepped up, he had enough great manners and also enough grooming and sophistication to be able to communicate to anyone once he started to have a conversation. But he wasn't someone who was so outgoing in that sense. He was much more focused. He was an intellect.
So
as much as I say he was an artist, he was truly an intellect.
Yes. So if you two danced together in his home, for example, what kind of music would you dance to?
Whatever was happening at that time. If I told you the name of the songs, like I love when people know, oh, do you remember that song? Yeah.
So it was like the contemporary dance music.
Oh yeah, contemporary.
Not jazz or.
No, contemporary dance music that whatever beat was happening at the time, whatever great song was, was always that. We would dance. Definitely would go out to good restaurants. He was someone who could discover a restaurant. The guy who owns Tribeca Grill was Drew. We often talk about the fact that Willie was the one who he said early came to my restaurant, and that was before Tribeca Grill. There was another restaurant in Tribeca that was right on West Broadway, and that was Drew's first restaurant, and Willie used to take me there. I can't remember the name of it, but the other thing where they're talking about connections is he helped Kim Highstratter and her partner David start the newspaper and paper magazine, and he connected me to them and them to me. Yeah, so that was and that relationship still
and
is.
What did you do with them?
Well, just support them, how it was happening, and then that was great because I had a model agency. They were starting a magazine, and it was literally paper in quarter folds. It was such a smart idea, so clever. Willie gave them whatever they needed to get started, and they basically, we are still friends, and we still work together. And I gave them models, and they were very successful.
So, what about Willie Smith as a black designer? What were things like for black designers at that time? How has that changed? How have perceptions changed about black designers over the years?
That's interesting. Okay, let me get this right. Well, designers of color in those days, there were many. It was not unusual for someone of color to design and to have a line of clothes. And back in those days, we had what we call angels that supported companies. Back in those days, retail stores could support a designer. That's how Ralph Lauren got started, and supporting Bloomingdale, supporting them. There were stores who could afford to do that back in the day. But as far as the designer being of color, they just so happened to have been of color. What happened? People say, well, what happened to the black designer? Why aren't there any black designers now? The world changed. The industry changed. It's not easy to be a designer. Back then, it seemed to be easier for a kid to come out of school and connect the dot to design.
So you're saying it was actually easier for black designers in the 70s and 80s than it is now?
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I will. Let me just fan myself a bit. Because there wasn't a bar, and I think it seemed, as a result of it, that they were more committed. It was easier because you could create something and there was more support.
For new ideas.
No, more support for your designers, for your designs. You could find a place that would let you put it someplace. you needed to have support. You need to have either someone to give you finances, you had to have somebody to let you have a place to exhibit it, you needed to have someone who believed in you, you needed to not feel like the mountain was so high. Nowadays, the mountain is high, and there are a lot of kids come out of school, they don't know how to do a lot of things, and they don't have, it's not easy to be a designer. People think, oh, they act, to me, I'm glad you said so. That's what happens. It's nice to live on the front, but it's also, the interesting thing about that is that people come out of school, and it's such a competitive environment nowadays, and people often say, well, what happened to the black designer? And this is where I get annoyed, and that's the reason why I'm working with the CFDA to help some of the younger designers who are not part of the membership yet to really strengthen their business, whether they be in apparel or accessories. Strengthen your business. Don't worry about being successful. Don't worry about being a star. Worry about having a strong business. It's very difficult. It's not the easiest thing. You don't have a lot of support because everything is so dispersed. We have a lot of luxury brands and we have a lot of big brands. You don't have those same, like I said before, angels who supported people easily and help people get going. The manufacturing business, the garment business has changed. We don't have it right as an incubator right between 41st Street down to 35th Street, right on 7th Avenue, around between 9th and Broadway. We don't have that anymore. It's very light because everything's out, farmed out. It's changed. The business has changed. So when people say, where's the black designers, I keep saying, they're around because I meet them. I see them. But they're not as in your face as before, because before it was a small little neighborhood of it. They're all down on, one is in 525, one is in 530. They're all in the buildings along the road, and you could see them coming in and out. And the media, when they do something, Women's Wear Daily is talking about them. But now it's much more different. So it's not easy to get so much attention anymore.
I was gonna get to that later, but you brought up the CFDA, the Council of Fashion Designers of America. So what advice would you give young black fashion designers today who are trying to break into the field?
Yeah, you have to be, it's not easy. Number one, because as I used to say to the Asian designers, the difference with them is that they come from a discipline. It's not easy. We as people don't come from merchants. You don't know your uncle and your aunt or your father and your mother who had a factory, So when you look at some other people, meaning like particularly the Asians, they come from that discipline of hard work. They don't know nothing else, and basically they have support of seeing it and having someone help them. Well, I would now say to a designer, as many people probably would say, is that if you want to be in design, really know the business. Learn the business, learn the background of the business, see what it really takes to do it. Get some homework on it. Don't look at Virgil and Kanye and think, oh man, I want to do that. Well, good luck on that, because everyone's not destined to be them. It's a lot of it's destiny too. So don't crumble. I always say have plan B, because if you don't succeed at that, don't think you failed, because the road is not so open to do. The road is quite narrow now. So only a few are going to get through that little tube and get to that end. Just have something else you also feel that is possible. It's not easy.
So is it more difficult or is it easier now for black models?
Well, before it was no big thing. Then it became a dwarf of nothing. No, you wouldn't hardly see anyone for a period of like 10, 15 years. Really about 10 years, a decade. Now it's like, oh, they do look good. Now it's like, oh, just put it on her.
So you're saying like now in your era there were more black models like 70s and 80s, and then there was a long period when there were barely any.
Yeah, that's right. And by 96, it started to die. It's like right when I left Bethann Management, even though I had a white model agency with some black kids and Latin kids in it, Asians too, still in all, it was something where all of a sudden the black fashion model just started to disappear because the industry started changing. They started going out to Eastern Europe, scouting models there. They never did that before. First of all, the curtain was down, then the wall things change.
Is that why you became an advocate, an activist for black models?
Advocate. I stick with that. I agree with you. My purpose was threefold. Because first of all, I knew that I could change it. I knew I could change the mentality of what was happening. I knew that my industry, as much as people say, they're racist, I don't care what you say. Well, let them say that. As a revolutionary, I have to know what I'm going into. That's why I feel the same thing with designers or anything. If you want to be an actor or anything, a dancer, learn what it all is about. I grew up in the business. I know I'm well respected. But I also didn't think that the people who were now doing what they were doing were smarter than me. They didn't have the experience I had. And I knew what we had before. If we had it before, I felt like in the end of the day, we should have it again. We could have it again, because those who are denying that inclusion, diversity, is out of ignorance, because that's a new sheriff in town. So all I had to do is sit back and see it. Now, my reason when I say it's threefold is because if I was to help to change the image of what I knew I could work with that could help change not just my industry, which is the model industry, which services the fashion industry, would also change, to me, the entertainment industry. It would change a lot of things. I believe when I used the fashion model, because she's a visual, once people begin to photograph her, put her on the runway, if they got used to that again, people got used to seeing color. So I'm thinking, I can change this part. I believed it. I needed help, but I believed it because I believed that they weren't racist. I believed they were ignorant. And I stayed in that lane. Soon as you sort of say race, the people who are doing it drop back and say, wait a minute, no, that's not me. I'm not a racist. All right, then let me explain what's happening. You're not a racist. I never called you a racist. But if you continue for 3 seasons, 4 seasons, 5 seasons, to keep using only 35 girls, and they're all white, not even an Asian, nobody, they're all white, and maybe use 1 or 2 people of color, then the results of it is racism. It's not your intention, but that's the result. When purpose, it's the education, then people go, so I had to do this internationally. So, you know, from here all the way to Europe, Europe is the most important thing because that's where a lot of the power is now. It wasn't like that before. They were over there, we were over here. But now, that's where everybody's looking.
For the modeling industry?
No, the industry of manufacturing of clothes.
Fashion. Okay.
Fashion.
Fashion industry. Okay.
The biggest houses is over there. So when before I used to say, oh, Italy, who cares about Italy? No, 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 they became the biggest advertisers. Well, I didn't notice that. It was happening like this slowly.
So do you think, so it seems
Luxury owned. You see, it's like the music business.
Right.
It was no longer the music business people on running the music business. Now it's just big companies coming in buying them. Same thing with the fashion industry.
So it seems like your work is coming to fruition, though.
No, came.
Has come to fruition.
No.
So would you say that the fashion houses of Europe are more amenable to diversity than fashion
No,
houses?
no,
of
no, no,
America?
no, me
No.
boy. Internationally, when I say internationally, I mean from up the street,
Yes.
all the way across the ocean, across the pond. Everything is equal. Everything from here, from a Calvin Klein, what Marc Jacobs has always been, but anything all the way through, because the industry that you're servicing is fashion, so everybody is blending now. Everything is like normal now to see the girl of color. But what it also did is it's affecting other things. That's what I knew would happen. I don't have to say it so much, because what really happened, this is where I really feel like Willie and people like that are in my head or holding me up, is because this is something that you know. If white people get used to seeing people of color, then all of a sudden it's a no-brainer to them.
Yes.
It just has to remind the eye.
So you think we've gotten to that point now?
Oh yeah.
I know I've seen a lot more darker skinned models. You don't think that's a trend? You think that's
You don't have
changed,
no
that
idea. As a revolutionary, I got my foot on the clutch. I'm worried that it could be. I always keep my awareness, but right now we're riding a nice wave. I don't think it's a trend.
That's good.
I don't think it's a trend. I think we might be okay. What I'm worried about, is a trend, is that West African model. That's getting scary for me. Because when you keep having so many girls that not, I don't care what people say. People say, but Bethann, I ain't gonna say nothing bad about my African sisters. See, I'm more discriminatory than that. If you're not really just because you're black and you're tall and you're skinny, don't make you a great model. I don't care. I don't buy black. I buy great. So for me, I'm worried about that because that could throw us back because they're now putting so many out there that the white booking person might say, well, we did that because fashion is that. It's called next. So I'm worried if they keep it like blended and not try to repeat like when they had Alec Weck, all the agencies were trying to find them an Alec Weck, and they were the worst make-believe Alec Wecks ever. But now that's the same thing they're doing. Well, they got a Duke, so now they're gonna try and get another Duke. Well, they got a Nook. She's great too, but they look different. They're dark as anything, but they're different features. And now they got some girl, this is an agency in one place, I follow him just to see what he's doing, but I won't even like anything because I don't want him to think I'm supporting him. Because I'm looking at one of these girls, I go, oh God, what are they doing? But when the white people start seeing that works, they just start booking it. It's not, they don't discriminate. They don't say, it's almost like this is interesting, it's almost like they're afraid to be politically incorrect now. They say, well, she's black and she's African, she looks tall, and like when Valentino did the show he showed so many black girls with the big dresses, the couture. There was girls he was using, I didn't think it was a good casting. Everyone was writing me saying, Bethann, look how brilliant, and they were all praising all my work. I was saying, I wouldn't have booked half of them girls, because some of them couldn't walk, but they were tall. He needed the tallest ones to walk. So those are the stories that you look at and you say, well, has it changed? It has. Is it much better? Absolutely. Has it allowed even celebrities to be on covers in September? That never used to happen. Last year, every September magazine cover was a black person. Every single one, whether it had been somebody famous, it could have been Michelle Obama, to a bunch of models, Naomi or anybody else, or Rihanna, it didn't matter. The point, as much as I always prefer it to be a fashion model, I have to take what I get because I know that subliminally, any brown person on that cover helps us, even though I'd rather for it be a model.
I want to ask you about Rihanna because she's done some groundbreaking shows, but before I do that, let's talk about the Battle of Versailles that you were a part of in 1973.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience. That's considered to be a groundbreaking show.
Well, no, it was a groundbreaking situation. That was, you know how it came about? Do you know how it came about?
Tell us as if I don't know. From the beginning, tell the story, please.
Well, okay. Do you have any tequila? Okay. I'm sorry. This is my house. I'm sorry.
I don't have tequila.
It's a long story. All right. So Eleanor Lambert was the publicist in America that represented a lot of practically all the top designers. And she and the wife at the time, Francois de la Renta, of Oscar de la Renta, came together with an idea to benefit the Marie Antoinette Theater as a benefit to bring the American designers, 5 American designers over and join with 5 European designers. Eleanor Lambert's, as a good publicist, idea was to put the American designers on the map in Europe so people could see. And so it started out as a nice benefit. And every designer had to select models, but each model selected had to have had 3 designers who said yes to them so they can make the cabine. There were white models, black models, dancers. We had dancers, mostly white dancers. And then we had Liza Minnelli.
Liza Minnelli, I was just
Thank you.
Yeah.
Liza Minnelli. I was thinking of her father helped me get the name. Liza Minnelli. So it was all going well for a period of time, but then eventually, as time was going on, it turned out that the press in Europe started to suggest that it was silly that we should be going over there because there's no way we could show with such fine designers. We were just sportswear designers. And so at some given point, it became a battle instead of just a benefit. And for all those American editors and all that was going to support us and go over with us, they started backing down, feeling insecure. And we went over, and it wasn't the easiest because of the conditions. And we were in the Hall of Versailles, cold as anything. They didn't have enough provisions, bathroom, toilet tissue, food to eat, but it was long rehearsals. And that's what became our basic foundation reality.
You were describing the Battle of Versailles.
Yeah, so what winds up happening is that we have Stephen Burrows, Anne Klein, Oscar de la Renta, Bill Blass, and Hardison. The French, I may leave out a name, but I'm going to go with Courage, Cardin, Yves Saint Laurent, Givenchy. I always forget someone. But anyway, I don't know. But anyway, it became a battle. And it was a pressure for the Americans because, you're a fish out of water, so to speak. And my experience was that I was working still as an assistant to Stephen Burrows, but more I ran the design studio, not just like a personal assistant. I ran the design studio with him, but I also was one of the models. And I was modeling for Stephen, Anne Klein, and Oscar took me. Yeah. In the end, it was my moment when I walked down that the programs went up in the air and the stomping and everything and the excitement, and we knew, even though we were first, we knew, we got this.
What did you do that was different, that stood out?
I through the whole time, because I wasn't really, when I had to do my part of the rehearsal, I would just be marking it. I wasn't really giving my all because I was basically, until there's really that moment, I have nothing to give. I just want to know where we have to stand. And Hardison kept yelling, Beth, come on, Bethann, give it now, come on, give it to us. Come on, Bethann, we're counting on you. And I go, yeah, okay. And then, but what happened, because of the pressure, and you knew that they were saying, we weren't going to do it, and who were we to come? And this was the media, not so much the public. And we didn't have many people there to support us either. I think when the time came, from the moment I hit, because I'm an actor and I'm a performer, from the moment I hit the stage, I defied the audience. I defied them. And in my defiance, it was the way I looked at them, it was the way I came down, because it was a embank. It was a stage, it wasn't a runway. And it was that centerpiece, and we all had trains from Stephen Burrows. It's the Stephen Burrows moment. And we had twills, long twills that was in our hair. Everybody had a chignon and stuck in but I was the only one that had a short natural. So it just went through. And I was always very, very thin. I mean, really skinny. And I was wearing the dress that he made for me specifically as a tribute to Versailles, because it was something he doesn't normally work in, which is woven. He normally works in knits. It was a yellow canary color, single color, where he normally works in colors. And it was more made like a couturier. He made an undergarment. He really did it. So I was to wear this, and that was my dress. But coming down, I just basically, it was what I was saying to them, and I'm a good walker. And by the time I got to the end of the stage and threw my train down and stood, the way I looked, the way I did it, it just made them, all of a sudden, I started hearing, and it just, the feet started hitting the wood, and then all of a sudden, the programs, they threw their programs up in the air, and they started saying, bravo, bravo! And I stood there with such strength, looking at him. I never flinched, I never turned my head. I just looked at that, and it, as Bill Cunningham said, God rest his soul, it just penetrated. And at that moment, I could see Hardison on the sidelines, and Liza Minnelli saying, go, Bethann, go. And they're screaming, Stephen, come look. And they had to come on the side of the stage, and they were cheering, and tears started coming out of my eyes. But at that moment, after that, a couple of times a girl would come down and they get the same cheers. Not the same as big explosion the first time, but they got a lot of the cheers. They came out and they just had a huge, like they were doing the Ed Sullivan Show. It was a variety show of so much nonsense, so many acts. It went on, and it wasn't interesting. Ours was interesting because we didn't have any sets, because Joe Euler, who was creating it, didn't have the right measurements. He did everything in inches. It was in centimeters. We didn't have anything other than music. They had never ever experienced listening to a girl walk to a runway, because everything with them was at atelier and very classic, sophisticated, and we were moving to music. That was so. That was things that were so different. So it was a bare stage, Jess Liza, the dancers, and it was choreographed. God bless Kay Thompson, and we
What were
won.
you thinking and feeling on the inside in that moment?
That I just basically wanted us to win. And I was going to defy them for even putting us through that pressure.
So when you heard the claps, though, how did your emotions change?
It changed to the fact we got this. I was just I didn't even realize what I had been doing. I just knew it's just the way you do something, and I finding that beat, and that it was that finding that low end beat that I was walking to and what I was doing. And I think at that moment when I got to the end, even when they were screaming, I still didn't move, and that really made them raw. That they couldn't believe that I stood there and I wouldn't move for a while. I just held it. It's the actor in me, but it was emotional.
It's nice.
Very
And there were 10 models 10 black models with the in that show, I understand.
Was it?
That's what I've read. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes. Do you know some of the others? Do you remember some of the others?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was Pat, Billy, Amina, Ramona Saunders, Charlene Dash, Norma Jean Darden. I said Billy. I must have said Billy. 7. I think it was 9 of us.
How did that come about? That
What?
you all were involved, that so many black models were involved in that show?
No, that wasn't unusual. I'm saying to you.
So it wasn't unusual?
No, people make a lot of it now because they're like, they're living in their world now. So the world now is like, whoa, look at what y'all did that. No one even heard of Versailles until just 8 years ago. I mean, it was just because the Metropolitan Museum, their diversity department there in the design, the costume, I don't know, they have something. This woman learned about it, and she approached the museum to do a citation, to give us something, to recognize it. And they did this big luncheon. No one had ever heard of it. That day, when all the news went on the network news and all, that's when Deborah Riley heard about it. One night, she just heard it. And she did her first documentary, first film she ever did. She picked it up. Behind that, Robin Givhan did her first book based on Versailles. Everything happened within just in a year.
So that's reflective of that moment in time.
Yeah, and then also we had two other documentaries that's come out on it, all in the same time frame.
So what do you think about the fashion shows that Rihanna is putting on with women of different sizes and shapes and colors?
It's good marketing. I think what Rihanna's doing now with that is because she's reflecting a market. She's not from fashion. She's basically doing something that it embraces. It's not like what we do. Still for me, I'm still all about that drawn silhouette. I'm still about that in my head. But I know the world's changed. People need to see, because we no longer have the fashion industry as was before. Now it's all part of popular culture. So the outsiders now influence fashion. Before, it was not anything that outsiders cared about. That was just a little small island that people just did their thing. Nobody gave a shit about wearing clothes of some designer. They had their own clothes. They can go to a lot of stores and buy clothes. Now it's changed. Everybody wants to be a part of that because it's so in their face now. And so the thing that she's done is that she doesn't come from design. She's not a designer per se. She doesn't come from the area of the background of fashion. So she's doing exactly what's important. She's just reflecting exactly all that is out there. And she recognizes, like many people, there's so many beautiful girls and women who can appreciate that. So I think it's wonderful too. I hope I see this show that's come up, because I saw the Fenty, the lingerie show last year.
Oh, you saw that show?
Yeah.
I saw the video. It was
Yeah,
great
it's
show.
great.
So let's talk about your current work with Gucci and how they hired you. Was it as a result of the scandal that took place, or let's talk about that.
Yes. So Gucci had this debacle of the Bacala sweater that that many people felt reflected blackface. And this particular sweater so happened to have been in black and red. But there were sweaters of different colorations way before shown before that one, even though this was not an ad, even though people get a lot of the information wrong. This was not Gucci promoting anything. It just was part of the e-commerce that it was put on the site, just in a different coloration. 2 months before, Rihanna had worn the sweater in turquoise and orange. It's a cool, funny thing. All you need nowadays on the internet is 1 or 2 people to say something is negative, and people see it as negative. So with that, it became like a brush fire for someone, a smaller town, well, the company's not small, but in a small country like Italy, for them to have the situation happen. And so people were reflecting because of course, I think it was the governor from Tennessee, him having that moment too of when he was in college, what he did, a lot of little things.
Virginia, that was Virginia.
Virginia.
To Tennessee, I think just happened like this week.
Oh yeah. Oh dear.
Else, yeah.
Tell me about that after. To Virginia, yeah, and then also before that was Mutual Prada had the Gwaliwad doll, and that was another thing. Before that, right after, just to show you how things were happening, right after the Gucci sweater, then Burberry had a noose, he did a noose around it, and then of course they said, oh, it's either to hang yourself or commit suicide. It's unfortunate how this is, because now we're not free now to just express. The Gucci situation was interesting because what happened is that because the collaborative partnership that Dapper Dan has with Gucci, it made it very important for Dapper Dan to show action, because he too was being lumped into, oh, you ain't nothing, you just a Tom. He's getting all the negative press that's falling even on him. He knows who he went in a partnership with, because he didn't go in there easy. He went in there very clear. But still in all, it's affecting a nation, it's affecting people's business, and it's affecting people who basically had no idea what blackface was. I mean, it's like once you talk about, Jamaican history, there are people who don't know the history of something. They had no idea. It's the coloration that looked so familiar too, right? So Dapper Dan had a meeting in Harlem. He had certain people come, and he had, luckily, that the CEO was coming into America to do a talk at a school. So the top executives with the CEO from Gucci took the meeting in Harlem. I was also part of that meeting in Harlem, invited by Dapper Dan's team. But I already knew I wanted to help the company. I didn't know that they would want to feel the same way about me. When things like that happen, then it's all about education, and it's getting in there, because I'm unusual. I know this. I didn't see it as blackface. I saw it as just funny. I didn't see it. But then so many blacks I know that were of color, blacks that usually goes together. Blacks I know, but I so happened to, and I was thinking about this. I said, is it because they're foreign? They were born in another country? They didn't see it like that.
Because they didn't have the history of minstrelsy.
No. Just as a black person might still see that. Like I have this young man who's like what at those days would be called Sambose. But I have black friends who doesn't see that as a negative, or didn't see the sweater as a negative. But I was thinking, because like Iman, she's from another country, but she's been here since 35, 40 years. If something is negative, something's negative. It's just how you read it, how you see it, how it affects you. But as I said in my thinking, and I was very vocal in the meeting in Harlem, but I think it was more for the fact of the things I had said to the Gucci people even the night before, and also for the fact that how they saw how the community regarded me. So I was going to say, Miss Bethann, so what, no, let Miss Bethann speak first. And I became like, it was just funny to me. But in the end, I had no idea. These people moved so fast, and the CEO wrote the letter right the next day. Everyone that was in that meeting received it. They were shocked. This man moved so fast. They moved so quickly on this because the last thing they wanted to do is have this be their legacy. And their respect for the community, even though it's not, people think, oh, we're going to cancel them, or we're going to boycott them. But the black income that they get is very small.
Right, I would imagine, yeah.
Right? But the reputation of the influence, the concern that people who are good would never want to offend the people.
Right, so they might influence others from purchasing. Right. So what are you doing with them now?
So they asked me the next day for me to fly to Italy. So I've come in and they've asked me to be a consultant and an advisor to the brand. And so I'm working more directly. My manager is right out of Italy. So I help them to see if there's something that they're not sure about, they run things by me. Now they've hired another young man about 2 months after me that's of color that they hired from Coach. And he, at Coach, he was at Armani and he was also at Calvin Klein.
Doing the same thing?
No, he was a publicist.
Okay.
So they hired him to bring him in and to broaden his possibility of what he would do. It wouldn't just be publicists, to help them to really, they had a lot of initiatives they already had in place, but when this happened, they even made more of a commitment financially and made more initiatives. So he does help.
Every fashion house should have something like this? Have someone
No,
like you?
luxury brand houses.
You think they should have someone like you to consult with on these issues?
Luxury brand houses.
Yes, luxury brand houses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Luxury brand houses, European, they're already doing it.
Right, they're already doing it.
Yeah. So Chanel now has a diversity officer. I am the first person of color that was even associated to the Gucci company in Italy. But I was an old.
You mean the first person of color, not the first person of color working with Gucci?
In Italy,
In
yes.
Italy, really?
Yeah. It's Italian. Mm-hmm. I mean, people say
That's still a big
shocking.
deal, though.
They
But
said
it's still kind of a big deal. But
well,
yeah,
I guess it's a big
yeah.
deal that I'm the first to do.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm not. Well, first of all,
I mean, there are some black people in Italy.
Yeah. But not like, if you go to sit in Milan and you watch who goes in the stores, you don't see black people. You see black people who are basketball players, rappers, people like that. You don't see like the common man like you see in America. You don't see the average Joe walking up and down. You don't see that. I don't care what anybody, people say, that's not true. Oh, yes, it is true. I worked with Dolce & Gabbana with Naomi to do this tour around the world. I sat in a store at Dolce & Gabbana and I watched, it's the most extraordinary experience I had. I'll never forget it. I watched people come in, the money they were spending, the men coming in with their women and buying, and the women trying one thing all day long. It was like back in the days of Bloomingdale's when everything was happening. You didn't see any black people. They don't have black people. They have black people over there. Like we have Chinese people in Chinatown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you don't see them like that. Maybe they're Ethiopians and things like that, but they're not middle income. They're not trying to, they don't need to be, they're just happy they have a place to live. So for me, I've always been someone who liked Gucci. I used to love the Gucci brothers. When this man used to want me to work for Women's Wear Daily, he was trying his best to do anything he could to get me to work. He would take me to lunches. He'd have me meet him. When Aldo Gucci came in, he'd take me to lunches. And I like the, I'm a little sick this way, but I like the gangster feeling of the Gucci brothers, And so I was always attracted to, I love that whole mafia thing. And so I was always interested in the Gucci brothers, people getting killed on boats and nobody admitting it. That was a long time. So I was always open, and I knew that they were making mistakes. And this is the same thing with the black fashion model, making sure she's on that runway so that it can change the way people see things. But also to have companies like that be educated by the right people. And that's the reason why I had no problem. I was very open and happy that they wanted me to come in and work with them.
So have you made a lot of, we were just wrapping up your discussion about your work with Gucci, and you were telling me about Some of the progress that's
some of
been
the progress. So all the initiatives that they put into place, they were the fastest luxury brand to move so fast. So they've hired people to come in and work in the studio in Rome, so that there's not just eyes once it gets to production, but eyes before it even leaves the studio.
So they're diversifying their company.
Yeah, they diversify it. They also now have finally, just a month ago, named a diversity officer. She's a Puerto Rican Latina woman. So they have a diversity officer too, besides the change makers, which is I'm on that board, and many interesting people are. So they're doing things with schools, and they're putting money into students who want to work in fashion. As I always say to them, please, I'm all about business. So don't just let it be just about design. Let it also be about learn to be in the fashion business. So they can learn about the business and how to make a better business. Like people should be, like if you're in marketing or something that's more than just, if you don't design, maybe some other part of that industry you'd like to be a part of.
So we're going to wrap this up. I have a couple more questions, but
They're wrapping it up.
Yeah.
How is that possible? We said to 4. I want to talk more. Okay, sorry.
I'm not done. I
No,
just have
no.
like maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
Okay.
But you mentioned your advice for black fashion designers. What advice would you give young black models? Would it be the same?
It's different. Yes. The advice I would give a model of color is quite different than I would give a designer of color. And the reason for that is because the model of color is she's just visual. A person that actually has a craft, an ability to be able to do something with their hands, their minds, is quite different than someone who's going to be judged by just how they look and what they have to go through to get to be that person. Both are journeys, no doubt. And some of us are going to make it and some of us are not. But the person who has a talent, a skill, is completely different than a person who just looks good. And so when a model has to want to model, I do think that everybody who goes into an industry should learn about the industry, not just about what's happening currently, but why don't you look back a little bit and see what else was there and see when it wasn't there and try to learn a little something. But most people nowadays don't have that time because everything is speedy, everything's fast, everything's the internet, and they don't have the time, it seems. But if you're wise, you would. And then recognize just because your neighborhood and your neighbors and your aunt and your uncles tell you should be a model, until that person who has to represent models say you should be a model, that's when you listen. But if you want to just go out because everybody now wants to be a model, it wasn't like that when I was growing up or when I became a model. People think that you want to become, no, people say, come on, please model for me. They talk you into it. Nowadays, you got mothers having babies in a month and they're writing you and saying, could you please look at my... It breaks my heart. Everybody wants to be in this game. It's unfortunate. So I'm always pushing people away, even when I had my model agency, saying, please, technology, go towards, I'm always saying that. But at the end of the day, the black fashion model has to know that it's, even though it looks like a lot of people working, it's still a narrow, narrow tube to go through.
So what qualities do they have to become a successful black model?
The only thing you have to have is what the eye of the beholder who's going to represent you says you have it. In other words, should be tall. You should be 5'10", because now the competitive height, the average girl is no longer 5'8", is definitely, that's if you want to be a commercial model. But if you want to be a high fashion model, then that's another statistics. So definitely you're going to have to be 5'10". You're going to have to be structurally narrow-hipped, very lean. The problem with a good old white girl and a good old American black is good old American white, a good American black, is that we tend to have hips, right? We tend to be a little broader. Where the Eastern European girl is very narrow. The Eastern African girl is very narrow. West African girl is very narrow. So that's what you're competing at, is that silhouette. If you have the height, and please have good legs, even though a lot of good legs are not coming out as much as they used to, please have good legs.
Okay. So with all of your accomplishments, not just in fashion, but your work as an advocate, your work as a business owner, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'm proud of Kadeem because he's a good actor. And I'm glad that we have, sort of like individually, for someone who didn't want to have him as a young kid, I'm so glad that he and I survived. And I'm sure my father's like, whew, a lot. And I'm very proud of the fact that at this age I'm still relevant. I'm very proud of that, and that's one of the things I want to say tonight. I have no speech, and I get in front of the audience and I just pray and then just speak. But that's one thing.
You're receiving an honor tonight.
No, I'm giving it to Patricia Cleveland, Pat Cleveland.
Oh, great. Okay.
And that's the thing I want to say. It's about relevancy, and it's nice that you can. I'm proud of the fact that, just I got a letter from Tom Ford to ask me to be on his advisory board. He only wanted 8 people for the CFDA because he's now the new chairman. I just received another note from the BOF that they want me to come in if I could help them to do something else in regards to something they're going to do about diversity. I'm just impressed. I'm pleased that you can still be breathing, be healthy enough that you can still offer because of something the way you think or how you've done things that people that you're regarded in a certain way. But more often than not, I think doing Bethann management was a big coup for me because I didn't want to do it and I was successful at it. And that those kids got that money and made sure I did it. Those are a lot of things I'm very proud of. And there's probably so many more things that I just can't think of. But in the initial thing, I'm glad that my family, because we're a very tiny family. I'm an only child. My son's an only child. My mother was an only child. I mean, we're tiny, but I'm glad that we are, I'm glad that Kadeem has another job, and I'm glad that Sophia is working in what she loves, which is video games. And she's in a huge industry. And I'm just glad that I'm sorry, I didn't mention her before. Sophia's my granddaughter. She's Kadeem Hardison's daughter. So I'm happy for that. That we, at this beginning of this year, wow, the Hardisons got a job, because even I, at some point, was thinking, do I need to get a roommate? Because I don't want to use my savings to pay my expenses. I want my savings either to invest in something or to travel. But then all of a sudden, 3 consultancy things happened at the beginning of the year, and one of them was Gucci, which I'm very proud to work with. I'd want anybody that needs help to get it right for us, that we can benefit from it as a people. I'm interested and I'm down. And that's why I was so happy about them, because they want to get it right.
So what would you like people to learn about Willie Smith from this exhibition?
Oh,
When they come to see it?
First of all, I took a very learned, smart young man. There's a few people who've never even heard of Willie. And I took him to see the Willie film. And he was just so thrilled to see this, because it could have been a film that was made today. Well, now the people are going to come and see whatever they help them find, because when Alexandra first came to me, I thought this is almost impossible, because it's not like people have Willie Smith things all around. Some people do. Even mine, I got rid of most of my things. I had 1 shirt left. So I didn't know how they were going to do it. But she didn't either, but they were determined. But as they begin to develop it, they realized that Willie had so much more to him. There's so much more about him that they can put into. So I hope that when people walk away, they learn about someone they never heard of, and those who had heard of him before learns more about who he was. I'm so excited about this whole thing because, as I said before, Willie Smith and Stephen Burrows were my bookends, and I was able to provide the opportunity for Stephen Burrows to have an exhibit similar to this with the Museum of City of New York. And when this came, I thought, oh God, there's a God, because wow, both things are not easy to do with 2 designers of color. They're not, and you've got to find people to come in and support the museum, to help the museum. I'm trying to do that now. I got to get back to, I would hope that Gucci could come in and help. I don't know, they've already, they extend their money way before. So I just got to see if they are, we sent them the stuff, but they just got back from holiday, so I'm going to see, because she asked me, is it possible? I brought it up to her. She never asked. I'm just happy that people can know that this exists, because in order for anyone to know about anything, it has to be documented. And that's what I'm very excited about. I'm just happy that this museum and this curator has come to terms with the fact that this should be done. And in it being done, it will educate others.
Thank you, Ms. Hardison.
You're welcome.
So we're rolling. It is still September 4th, 2019. We had signed off, but I had forgotten to ask a question about Basquiat. You have a lovely Basquiat on the wall. Tell me the story of Basquiat.
Well, I could have a lovelier Basquiat on the wall if that wasn't his very early days of trying to make a few nickels and dimes. That's more history than anything else. But my relationship with Jean-Michel was, I knew him, and he meant a lot to me. I had a story that involved Willie Smith, that Willie knew I knew Jean-Michel, and it was, once again, he being a person who loved art, he was a collector. He wanted me to introduce him to Jean-Michel, because Jean-Michel was someone that was quite known at the time, downtown, right there on Great Jones Street. So I called Jean-Michel and told him that, I wanted to bring Willie down to meet him. And he was very happy to do so. He had a lot of stuff in his studio, of course, which is right there where he lived. And I took Willie down, and Willie just, boom, boom, boom. He must have bought like 7 or 9, really, paintings. And at the time, I had this really, I saw this one, they weren't discussing it, so it was this little, not too big, a little kind of small black and white one that I really had my eye on. And I was just hoping with what I was doing that maybe they might gift me this, this little painting. And you're not going to say, can you get me this? You're not going to do that. And let them go through their little meeting and doing and stuff. And so he wound up buying a good amount of art from him. And Jean-Michel contacted me the next day, and he was very happy to tell me he really wanted to, bring me a gift too. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to get specific, but maybe he knew, because I mentioned twice, oh, I really like this one, or I really hoping they'd remember. But he came to me here, actually, in my apartment. And he comes and he has this large, like Ziploc bag of marijuana. And I thought that this is my moment. I was going to get this little black and white painting from him. This Basquiat that you see there came to me 2 to 3 days after his funeral, because a woman who knew my closest and saw how distraught I was about his death, she had like 5 that she had given him, that she had bought from him when he was like, at that time when he was constantly needing money, or naturally so as artist. And he was selling these small paintings when he was first starting, and she would buy it. She bought a few of them. So she came to me. She lived around the corner. She's an art director of a magazine at the time. I knew her, and she brought. So the painting that I have now is right after Jean-Michel passed away, and Paula Greif gave me this. She gave me a choice of 5, and I chose that one. But before that, I've never owned Jean-Michel's work. Of course, it was impossible. And when he came with the weed, it was so much marijuana that I was saying that it takes a lifetime to even smoke this. And he was like, well, then we're good. No, that's not the point I was trying to make. But it was, so that's what it was.
So that was from Jean-Michel.
That was from Jean-Michel. But, there were so many wonderful things about him, and, I adored, but I was very grateful for Paula for that. And what's happened recently, because the reason why she knows that story probably is because they heard it at 92nd Street. Why? Because the person who, Mark Bozak, who also was involved with Willie, when he showed the film, I was on stage also to talk about Willie, brought this story up. No one had ever heard this story before, including Mark, but Mark was also at the 92nd Street Y, and he edged me to tell the story to the audience. So she heard that. So that's a reason why that she knows of it too.
Thank you, Ms. Hardison. We are signing off. Kelly Elaine Navies, Bethann Hardison, and Trudy Hutcherson, New York City. Thank you.